You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, a lack of basic energy efficiency measures is costing households more in fuel bills and putting net zero targets at risk. The Royal Thai Navy is racing to contain an oil spill off the eastern coast of Thailand before it reaches land. And how cardboard creations could help the film industry go greener. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, almost 13 million homes are lacking basic energy efficiency measures, which could save households up to £70 a year and save the planet more than 4 million tonnes in carbon emissions. Analysis of energy performance certificate data, also known as EPCs, shows a few simple steps could help cut emissions from our homes, which account for 22% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and keep the government's net zero targets in sight. EPCs rate a building from A to G, with A being the most efficient. It reflects how much it might cost to heat and power your home and its likely greenhouse gas emissions. The government has set targets for all homes to be given an EPC rating of C by 2035. Currently, 16.8 million UK homes are missing that very target, and here's why. 2.2 million of those homes lack basic insulation on hot water cylinders. Having that could reduce emissions by 400,000 tonnes. 6.4 million homes either lack or could improve their heating controls, which could save around 1.8 million tonnes in emissions. And close to 11 million households are yet to switch some of their lighting to energy-efficient light bulbs, which could save 1.9 million tonnes of emissions every year. Well, joining me now is the Chief Executive of CAMA, the company that collected that data. Orla Shields, thank you so much for your time. Orla, 11 million homes haven't made that switch yet to energy-efficient light bulbs. I mean, what's stopping people from making that change, do you think?
I think there's a lot of factors at play here. I think there's a basic lack of awareness that housing is one of the biggest contributors to UK emissions and costing people a lot of money that it doesn't have to. So residential properties account for 22% of all emissions across the UK. And it isn't as simple and as straightforward as introducing a step like banning petrol engines as it is in the transport industry. So we're kind of at the very beginning of our journey with housing. And I think there needs to be a lot of education around the fact that these simple steps can be taken. So with it is staggering that 11 million, almost 11 million properties don't have energy efficient light bulbs. Some of our sense is that some of the fixtures and fittings need to change around that, but our main feeling is that there needs to be more education around this topic. If you look at some of the really simple measures that you just went through there, Ashna, stuff like draft proofing can save 400,000 tonnes. That's draft proofing is just plugging holes around your house that are letting cold water in. Cold air in and warm air out. So that little step in your house can make a huge difference. Some other things that, aside from energy efficient fitting and energy efficient light bulbs, which is a really cheap and simple tip that you can impact, is looking at your thermostat controls. So as you mentioned, 6.4 million properties either lack or need to improve their thermostat controls, and being able to regulate the temperature in your house can have a massive impact. But you could also start with something as basic as turning off radiators in rooms that you're not using. These are all really simple steps, but if we collectively approach this problem with this mindset, we can actually collectively save a lot of money, but also, even more importantly, reduce the carbon footprint of the property industry.
Orla, thank you very much. An oil slick off the coast of Thailand is continuing to expand and is now approaching beaches on the country's east coast. The leak from an undersea pipe leaked tens of thousands of litres of fuel into the ocean before it was stopped. There are now two slicks. One is less than half a square mile, but the other is around 18 square miles. The largest is expected to reach the coast this evening and enter a national park, which is home to hundreds of seabirds and fish. The Royal Thai Navy is working to contain the spill so the oil can be removed before this happens. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Siobhan Robbins has more.
Well, this leak happened on Tuesday at a mooring station in the Gulf of Thailand, and it's estimated 60,000 litres of oil have now leaked into the sea. And for the last 4 days, the Thai authorities have had ships out, helicopters, planes, and also got help from experts in Malaysia to try and contain this spill. And one of the things they've been doing is spraying special chemicals on the water to try and break that oil down. Now, one of the main focuses today is a concern that the oil is heading towards the shore, with it potentially washing up on beaches any time this evening. So they've been really trying to contain it. And the Navy has said that they've got 300 personnel on the shore ready to collect any oil that does spill. They've put out special buoys also to try and protect the shoreline. And there's a big concern about the potential impact on the coral in this area, because it's actually a national park area, as well as the fact that those beaches are exceptionally popular with tourists. Now, the slightly positive news today from the Navy is that the oil does seem to have become thinner on the surface. It is still moving, and the Thai authorities have confirmed that the government has filed a police complaint.
Well, meanwhile, in Peru, authorities are dealing with the aftermath of an oil spill on the 15th of January, which is believed to be linked to the eruption of an underwater volcano near Tonga. Dead seals, birds and fish have washed up on the coast, covered in oil. Hundreds of volunteers are helping the extensive cleanup. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo called it the biggest ecological disaster to affect the South American nation in recent years. Well, now some of the day's other climate news for you. And the government's autumn spending package has been deemed a missed opportunity by environmental campaigners. The WWF says £55 billion of Rishi Sunak's budget, announced just before COP26, undermines climate goals and drives up emissions. A net zero test run by the charity said overall the package, which includes investment in new roads and the cut to air passenger duty, is expected to increase greenhouse gas emissions by 38 million tonnes over the next 4 years. More than 80 people have been killed by tropical storm Anna across southern and eastern Africa. In the last few days, intense rainfall has caused widespread flooding, with buildings collapsing. Across Madagascar, Malawi and Mozambique, hundreds of thousands of people have been affected. Experts say that storms in the regions are becoming more frequent as waters warm due to climate change. The National Trust has announced its first green corridor will be in Bath. Inspired by the Georgian pastime of spending time in the countryside, it will link the city to the hills that surround it. It's the first of 20 corridors planned by the conservation charity, designed to connect urban areas in England, Wales and Northern Ireland to green spaces. The Australian government has pledged $704 million over the next 9 years to save the Great Barrier Reef. Of the funding, more than $400 million will go towards remedying erosion on the Australia's northeastern coast. The rest will support the Green Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority and go towards research into making the reef more resilient to the effects of climate change. Now, from plastic bottles on set to paper scripts, throwaway props and a lot of travel, the film industry isn't known for its green credentials, is it? But many production companies are now focused on reducing waste, cutting emissions and making the business more sustainable. One studio boss in Manchester is making great strides towards a greener method of filmmaking by using cardboard sets. Fraser Maud has the details.
3, 2, 1, and action. And finally, here at Vector Studios in Manchester, we are...
In the world of film and television, looks can be deceiving. Take this Tudor house, for example, made without using any wood, metal or stone. It is, in fact, cardboard. It's 80% cheaper than a traditional wood or MDF set. It has a carbon footprint that's 90% lower, and it's 100% recyclable, as I found out on the Hogwarts Express.
The film industry in this country has grown 400% in the last 10 years, and it's still growing. We've got Peter Jackson, people wanting to bring productions over here. We've got Netflix, we've got all these things. We're short of resources. That's the reality. So the first thing is, how do you address the shortage in resources? And this does.
The cardboard comes from sustainably harvested trees in Sweden, and once the team has turned it into stone or steel or concrete or whatever, it arrives on set as flat packs. So we're standing in a kitchen where everything is cardboard, from the floor to the granite work surfaces to the metal cooker hood there. How do you do it?
Well, we're using a variety of techniques. So it's based on our vector board, which is incredibly strong for paper. And it's equivalent to wood, MDF. And we can do lots of things with it. So we can machine cut it, we can hand cut it, we use hand building techniques and fairly traditional kind of theatre and film finishing techniques, scenic techniques. But we can also do the digital side. So we can print tiles, we can print kitchens. And this comes as a digital file that we can change.
The sets weigh a fraction of their wooden equivalents, meaning build times and transport costs are greatly reduced.
You know, I can imagine that cardboard film sets could be easier to make, easier to take down, easier to store away afterwards and reuse for other purposes. I can imagine there could be all kinds of benefits, and it's just taken a bit of creativity from someone to get it off the ground.
And that creativity is happening here on an industrial estate in Manchester. The time and cost savings, along with the incredible realism, should mean that convincing production companies to adopt cardboard sets shouldn't be too hard a sell. The film and television industries have been encouraged for some time to reduce their environmental impact. In the future, it could be humble cardboard that offers at least part of the solution. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Manchester.
More on those sets later in the show. Now, climate change isn't just affecting the ocean's living organisms, but also historical treasures hidden under the sea. Marine archaeologists are now worried that shipwrecks and other artefacts are being damaged by warming waters and changing weather.
Well, with the case of Invincible and many other shipwrecks in the UK, they're located in shallow coastal waters, so they're affected by the physical environment. So that's tides, currents, and wave action. And this is allowing those marine-boring organisms to thrive and breed and multiply and feed on the exposed parts of the wreck. The danger is that we're losing huge amounts of underwater cultural heritage. You know, stormier weather conditions are exposing these shipwrecks. They're then becoming more vulnerable to the physical, biological and chemical processes.
Do stay tuned. Coming up here on the Daily Climate Show, I'll be joined by artist, environmental activist and honorary president of the Black Environment Network, Judy Ling Wong, and editor-in-chief at Business Green, James Murray. We'll be discussing if last year's autumn spending review was a missed opportunity for climate action and if the film industry can really go green. Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day with artist and honorary president of the Black Environment Network, Judy Ling Wong, and editor-in-chief at Business Green, James Murray. Thank you both very much for joining us. Starting with, then, the report by WWF that says the autumn spending review announced just before COP26 undermines climate goals and drives up emissions. The charity ran a net zero test, which found the spending package is expected to increase greenhouse gas emissions over the next 4 years, I should say. So is this a missed opportunity by the government? We're asking. James, were you surprised to read this report?
Not at all with the conclusions. I think when the spending package was initially announced in the autumn, the immediate reaction from a lot of green groups and a lot of green businesses was it did feel like a missed opportunity. It was there just before COP26. The government had its net zero strategy sort of imminent and was planning to sort of explain more clearly how it intended to decarbonise the economy fully within less than 30 years. And then the speech came out from Rishi Sunak. He barely mentioned climate change and the need to transition to net zero. And he did announce these measures of increased spending on roads and a sort of a lower taxes on air passenger duty and on flights. So, you know, there's some good stuff in there as well. It's true the government is doing a lot to drive forward innovation and deployment in areas like offshore wind, electric vehicles. You know, it's not fair to say the government's doing nothing on this front. But that particular budget felt like it could have been a lot bolder, particularly when also we need economic stimulus. You know, we were still coming out at the back end of the lockdowns then. The pandemic impact that we've had has still been severe on the economy as a whole. And there is an opportunity here to build back greener, as the Prime Minister had it. Before he slightly dropped that phrase in more recent times, and that that budget felt like a moment when you really could be more ambitious and start to drive forward some of these investments we need to see in areas like energy efficiency, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, smart grids, and various other areas. So I think a missed opportunity from this, the WWF's conclusion. I think a lot of people will agree.
I'll pick your brains on renewables in a second, James. But Judy, we saw those big climate commitments, didn't we, after COP26. Does some of that package that was announced by the Chancellor undermine that? The WWF is saying £55 billion of that could drive up emissions.
It is really important for us to give an image of absolute ambitious support for the movements into the future. Because after all, a lot of people don't realize it, but the COP26 presidency is ongoing until COP27 is in place. We are in one of the big driving seats for actions of climate emergency. So we need to be ambitious, seen to put massive amounts of needed money in that direction and be an example for others to lead the way. As James says, it's not that we don't do things that are and in a way quite important. For example, the Green Jobs Initiative, where the government is investing in green jobs and hopes to put in another 2 million jobs by 2030. That's a good initiative, but it's the overall ambition that has to come out right for climate emergency.
There is that targeted investment from the government, though, James, isn't there? You mentioned it earlier in the form of wind energy, but there is this huge support for renewables that is coming pretty quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the government's done a lot on offshore wind in particular, and it was around that time they announced the next wave of funding to support the next wave of offshore wind farms. Recently, we've seen the Scottish Crown Estate announcing that it's going to lease more of the seabed for offshore wind. So, you know, there's been huge progress on that front, and that will continue. And also, we're starting to see sort of onshore renewables come back online as well. So we are seeing that progress. What is sometimes missed about this, though, is the sheer scale of what's required is much larger than many people anticipate or understand. If we are to fully decarbonise and get gas and coal off the grid as completely, pretty much unabated gas and coal off the grid completely within the space of only about 15 years, then you just need renewables at truly massive scale, and you need them as quickly as possible. And the economic arguments for them have fallen away because they're increasingly cost competitive. I mean, you know, they are cheaper than gas in many ways on a levelized basis currently, and we're also seeing the cost of energy storage systems fall, and we're starting to see some really exciting work going on in hydrogen as well, where you could start to produce hydrogen using excess renewable generation capacity. So it's the thing where everything's pointing towards we need to be doing this at scale, and we need to be doing it really fast. And any potential barriers that stand in the way, whether that's the government not being as ambitious as it could be in terms of the contracts it's providing or planning constraints or the like, it needs to tear those barriers down as quickly as possible if we're to meet the overarching goals. And again, that budget and the last few months have been a real opportunity around COP26 and post COP26 to do that. And we're just not seeing the pace of change that's required at this time. And lots of businesses are waiting, they're ready, they've got the capital, they want to invest. They just need to get this pipeline of projects moving as swiftly as physically possible.
And Judy, just very quickly, you mentioned green jobs, but there is still a lot of upskilling to do, right, for people to retrain and really get there.
Yes, I mean, for example, the government has put in good initiatives to put in new and adapted apprenticeship standards in order to fill the skills gap that we have, and that is very good. It's all about, a lot of it is about where we are confident about where the money is coming from. And as you know, a lot of government money comes from our taxes. And because of the way a lot of rich people do not end up paying taxes, a lot of middle class and working class people have to foot the bill. I like to see government braver in taxing the rich. I mean, only last week, 102 millionaires came together and says, tax us. I mean, that's a breath of fresh air, isn't it? To see that coming from rich people saying they want a greater role in funding things, and I think that's very welcome.
We can hear a little bit more on the green economy in this week's episode of Sky News ClimateCast, where we hear from people who have made the transition, as Judy was saying, from a high-carbon career to a low-carbon one, all in the name of climate change. Do take a listen wherever you get your podcasts from. Next, guys, let's move on. Earlier, we were talking about production teams in Manchester using cardboard sets to lower their impact on the environment. But the average film is responsible for 500 tonnes of CO2. Judy, should Hollywood introduce stricter rules when it comes to, setting example and cutting back on emissions? Or actually, do you think, do you know what, we hear so much about climate change, let's not touch the Hollywood blockbusters because we need that respite, I suppose?
They can still make just as much money when they actually put some effort into being greener. I mean, for one thing, you can be sure about Hollywood, they're image sensitive. And in that way, ordinary citizens have some power. When we start to make certain ways of living and doing things unacceptable, that has a huge effect on their image. And I think that they should now start to state their intent as an industry and within the actors and actresses themselves to say, we will commit to this and start cutting all sorts of things, going right through the things they do, from how they travel to the materials they use, the energy they use in their building, is it renewable and so on. Just go through the whole list and just show off what they can do to us.
James, just a quick thought from you. Do you think carbon budgets could be the way to go?
It's really difficult to assign a carbon budget specifically to an industry, but where the having a net zero target for an economy as a whole is so important is it does encompass everyone. So there's no industry that can ignore it and say, no, we're not going to decarbonize. You'll have to. You know, Hollywood's in California. California has a big net zero target. We've got a huge film industry in the UK, and the UK has a net zero target. And of course, all the producers are responding to that. I mean, obviously, yourselves at Sky have a net zero goal. The BBC has a net zero goal. Netflix has a really ambitious net zero goal that they're looking to pursue as well. And what I think is particularly exciting about the film industry is it's inherently a very creative and technologically innovative space. So you are starting to see projects where outside broadcasts are saying we're going to ditch diesel generators and switch to hydrogen fuel cells. You've seen projects like the sort of resource efficiency that you were showing earlier about switching to cardboard sets. And it's also a really influential industry, and it can inform its viewers and it can inform its stakeholders and its suppliers, crucially, to say, you know, we're part of the net zero transition. We want it to accelerate. We want to see these clean technologies. So I'm a bit loath to sort of advocate for a specific carbon budget for one industry at a time, because you end up getting quite distorting effects in the economy as a whole. But every industry, from Hollywood down, absolutely has to respond to this necessity to fully decarbonise within the space of less than 30 years, which will be the fastest and most exciting and most consequential industrial revolution in human history.
We will see. Thank you very much, James Murray and Judy Ling Wong. Thank you for your time. Just before we go, on Monday, we'll be joined by host of Climate Curious podcast and director of TEDx London, Mariam Pasha, and director of the Conservative Environment Network, Sam Hall. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.